The HOA president stood beside the excavator, pointed at my backyard and said, "He's 70 years old. What's he going to do? Chase us with a rake?" Then the bucket dropped and tore a trench straight through the wetland my wife and I had spent 26 years protecting. I was gone 19 minutes, and when I came back, half my property looked like somebody had dragged a knife through it. The air smelled like diesel, broken roots, and that heavy mineral scent you get when deep soil is ripped open before it is ready to see daylight. Groundwater poured through a ditch nearly 6 feet wide, carrying clumps of marsh grass, shattered turtle nests, and pieces of the little cedar footbridge my late wife had built with me one summer. Standing beside the machine was Lorraine Mercer, president of the Briar Hollow Homeowners Association, wearing white pants, expensive boots, and the satisfied smile of somebody watching a problem disappear. She raised her clipboard when she saw me. "Emergency stormwater correction. Calvin," she called over the engine, "your swamp has been backing water into the new section." I looked past her at the excavator operator, then at the orange paint sprayed across my grass, and finally at the water rushing through a channel that had not existed that morning. "Shut it down," I said. Lorraine tilted her head. "Excuse me, turn off the machine before you make this worse." She laughed, and I mean actually laughed, like I had just threatened to call the principal. "The board approved this unanimously. The board doesn't own this land. The board has emergency authority, not over a protected riparian buffer." Her smile faded just a little. "It's weeds and standing water, Calvin. It's a state-mapped wetland connected to Miller Creek, and your contractor's excavating it without a permit." That was the first moment I saw uncertainty move across her face. But Lorraine recovered fast. People like her always do. They mistake confidence for knowledge, and because nobody challenges them, they start believing the two are the same thing. She stepped closer and lowered her voice. "You've been warned about this property for months. You chose not to cooperate." I looked down at the muddy water flowing over the toes of her spotless boots. "You just put your entire board inside a federal investigation." She stared at me for a second, then gave the operator a sharp wave. "Keep digging." That was Lorraine's first mistake. Her second was assuming I was just the quiet widower at the end of Alderidge Lane. My name is Calvin Reeves, and before I retired, I spent 32 years as a civil engineer specializing in floodplain restoration, drainage failures, and wetland permitting for the Tennessee Valley Regional Water Authority. I was not a lawyer, and I was not some environmental activist chaining myself to trees. But I knew exactly how expensive one illegal scoop of dirt could become when it landed in the wrong stream. My wife, Beth, used to joke that I could look at a puddle and tell you which agency would claim jurisdiction over it. She was not entirely wrong. We bought our place in Briar Hollow in 1996, back when the subdivision was 24 houses, 2 gravel roads, and a hand-painted sign promising country living with natural beauty. The best part was the 3-acre marsh behind our home, fed by an underground spring and connected through a narrow seasonal channel to Miller Creek. Beth loved that wetland from the first day. She planted swamp milkweed for monarchs, blue flag iris along the shallow edge, and native sedges where the soil stayed soft underfoot. I handled the boring work, grading, erosion control, water testing, and a small overflow basin that kept spring storms from flooding the lower homes. Over the years, people forgot that the wetland was the reason their basements stayed dry. They just saw cattails. Beth saw great blue herons, tree frogs, and a pair of wood ducks that returned every March. When ovarian cancer took her 9 years later, I kept maintaining the place because it was the one part of our life that still changed with the seasons. Every spring, something she planted came back, and for a little while, so did she. Briar Hollow changed after that. The old developer sold the remaining acreage to Eastgate Residential, and within 3 years, our quiet neighborhood doubled in size. Bigger homes, smaller lots, decorative ponds that did not drain correctly, and enough concrete to make every hard rain feel like a plumbing emergency. The rain arrived with the new section. She was a real estate broker, professional networker, and the sort of person who could turn a neighborhood picnic into a campaign rally. Within 6 months, she was HOA president. Within a year, the rules started multiplying. Trash cans had to be hidden behind approved fencing. Mailboxes had to match one of 3 designs. Basketball hoops required seasonal permits. Then Lorraine discovered my wetland. She first came to my door on a bright April morning carrying a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. "Mr. Reeves," she said, "we've received complaints about unmanaged vegetation and stagnant water." "From who?" "Several residents. Names?" She smiled. "Complaints are confidential." I invited her around back, mostly because I wanted her to see what she was talking about. A green heron lifted from the shallows as we walked down the path. Chorus frogs clicked from the reeds, and the water was clear enough to see minnows flashing over the sand. Lorraine looked at it all with the expression of a woman inspecting a restaurant kitchen after finding a hair in her soup. "This is exactly the problem," she said. "It looks abandoned. It filters runoff from 47 homes. It looks messy. Nature usually does. Our property values depend on consistent landscaping. Your property values depend on not flooding." She did not like that answer. Lorraine wanted clean edges, short grass, and water that stayed where brochures told it to stay. A living wetland offended her because it could not be controlled by committee. The violation letters started the following week. Excessive vegetation, unapproved water feature, mosquito hazard, improper drainage. Each one came with a fine, and each one cited a different section of the covenanters, none of which actually applied to my property. I responded in writing, attached maps, and requested a hearing. The rain postponed it twice, then held it on a Tuesday morning when most residents were working. She stood in front of a projector showing blurry pictures of cattails and a chart claiming homes near unmaintained water areas sold for 12% less. The chart had no source. The photos were not even from my property. Still, people nodded. Fear is persuasive when you put it on a slide. After the meeting, an older neighbor named Walter Dean caught me in the parking lot. Walter had lived there since the first phase was built. "She's after more than your grass," he whispered. "Eastgate wants that back parcel behind you." That night, I pulled county records, planning minutes, and corporate filings. 3 hours later, I found the real reason Lorraine cared so much about my wetland. Eastgate Residential had submitted a preliminary concept for 42 luxury townhomes on 12 acres behind Briar Hollow. The only practical drainage route crossed my property. The only attractive view faced my marsh. And the listing agreement for the entire project belonged to Mercer Premier Realty, Lorraine's company. Her commission would be worth more than $600,000. Suddenly, the fake mosquito reports made sense. The emergency meetings made sense. Even the orange survey flags that had appeared near my property line made sense. Lorraine was not trying to protect the neighborhood. She was clearing an obstacle. I printed every document, organized them by date, and placed them in the old metal file cabinet where I kept Beth's garden plans. Then, the evening before the excavator arrived, I found a certified letter in my mailbox ordering me to allow immediate stormwater remediation within 48 hours. I knew Lorraine was preparing to cross a line. I just did not know she planned to drive heavy equipment over it, tear it open, and leave the evidence running downhill in muddy water. The first thing I did was photograph everything, not because I was calm, but because I knew anger evaporates, and evidence does not. I walked the entire trench with my phone in one hand and a survey rod in the other, taking pictures from every angle, recording GPS coordinates, measuring depth, width, slope, and the direction of the muddy discharge. The excavator had cut through the shallow basin, severed the seasonal channel, and pushed wet soil into piles along both sides like a grave somebody had gotten tired of finishing. I found crushed frog eggs in the tracks, 3 shattered turtle nests, and a slick rainbow sheen where hydraulic fluid had leaked into the water. Lorraine followed me for a while, her clipboard pressed against her chest. "You're being dramatic," she said. I crouched beside a broken clump of blue flag iris Beth had planted 20 years earlier and placed a sample into a clean plastic bag. "No, Lorraine. I'm building a case." She rolled her eyes. "Against the HOA? Against everyone who touched that machine." The operator heard me and shut the engine down without waiting for her permission. The rain spun toward him. "I told you to continue." He climbed out of the cab and pulled off his gloves. "You told me this was association property." "It is. He says it's protected wetland. He's trying to scare you." The man looked at the water moving through the trench, then back at me. "You got paperwork, county maps, state survey, subdivision restrictions, and 32 years of knowing what unauthorized wetland excavation looks like." He did not say another word. He loaded the excavator onto the trailer and left Lorraine standing in the mud with 2 laborers who suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. By late afternoon, Half the neighborhood had gathered near my back fence. Walter stood beside me with his hand shoved into the pockets of an old canvas jacket. "She finally did it," he muttered. "Did what?" "Got so used to nobody saying no that she forgot no was still an option." A woman named Dana Whitmore from the newer section came over holding her phone. She had recorded Lorraine telling the contractors to keep digging after I warned her about the protected land. "I thought you might need this," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost embarrassed. "I voted for her twice. A lot of people did. She told us your property was causing the flooding." I pointed toward the new storm drains along the ridge. "Those homes were built above the original runoff plan. The water has to go somewhere." Dana stared at the trench. "So the development caused the flooding?" "The development created more runoff than the approved drainage system can carry. My wetland has been absorbing the excess." That sentence moved through the crowd faster than gossip at a church potluck. People began looking at Lorraine differently. Not as the woman protecting their homes, but as the woman who had been using my property to hide a problem her own project helped create. Lorraine left before sunset, but not before leaning close enough for only me to hear. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." I looked at the mud splattered across her white pants. "Neither do you." The next morning, I filed reports with the county sheriff, the state environmental division, and the regional office of the Army Corps. I also called an old colleague named Samuel Price, who had spent 25 years reviewing permits before retiring to fish badly and complain professionally. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Calvin, tell me you have photographs." 212, water samples, 4 locations, video. A neighbor recorded the order to continue. He let out a low whistle. That woman did not step on a rake. She jumped into a wood chipper. Samuel helped me organize the complaint so it would not get buried under routine paperwork. By Thursday afternoon, an environmental investigator named Mara Ellis was standing at the edge of the trench in rubber boots, staring at the damage with the expression of somebody who had just been handed an easy exam. She asked precise questions, took her own measurements, collected water, and photographed the exposed soil layers. When she finished, she looked at me and said, "This channel connects to Miller Creek during seasonal flow?" "Yes." "And the HOA obtained no state or federal authorization? None that appears in the public record?" "Who ordered the excavation?" I handed her Dana's video. Mara watched it twice. Lorraine's voice came through clearly over the engine. "Keep digging. You cannot stop us." Mara slipped the phone back into my hand. "Do not alter this site until we complete our review. I was planning to stabilize the banks before the next rain. Temporary erosion control only. No permanent repair yet. We need the damage visible." That was hard to hear. Every instinct I had told me to close the wound before another storm widened it. But Beth used to remind me that fixing something too quickly could erase proof of who broke it. So I installed straw wattles, floating barriers, and temporary silt fencing under Mara's supervision. Then waited. Lorraine did not. The following Monday, I received a certified notice claiming I owed the HOA $12,400 for emergency drainage work, contractor delays, legal review, and obstruction of an authorized community safety project. They had also added a daily fine for refusing access. I laughed so hard my coffee came out through my nose. Then I saw the final paragraph. Failure to pay within 10 days would result in a lien against my home. That part was not funny. My house had no mortgage. Beth and I had paid it off 6 months before she died, and the thought of Lorraine fastening her scheme to the last thing we had owned together made something cold settle inside me. I drove to the county records office and spent the rest of the day searching every filing connected to Briar Hollow. In the original subdivision documents, I found what I had hoped was there and what Lorraine had apparently never bothered to read. My parcel was listed as Tract 7, Environmental Preservation Lot, excluded from HOA assessments, Landscaping Authority, and Common Drainage Control in perpetuity. The wetland was not merely outside the HOA's reach. Its continued protection had been a condition of the entire subdivision's approval. I requested certified copies, then kept digging. Eastgate Residential's new townhome proposal included a stormwater plan signed by an engineering company called Sterling Land Solutions. The plan described my wetland as a proposed controlled drainage corridor, even though Eastgate did not own it. Attached to the application was a letter claiming the HOA had secured access rights from the property owner. My name appeared beneath a signature that was not mine. I sat there staring at it, while the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somebody had forged my consent. The clerk noticed my expression. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm about to be." That evening, Walter arrived with Dana and a third neighbor, Melissa Crane, who served as assistant HOA treasurer. Melissa looked terrified. She placed a flash drive on my kitchen table and said, "Lorraine has been moving money." The drive contained bank statements, invoices, board emails, and copies of checks. For 7 months, every household had paid a special assessment supposedly meant for culvert repairs and flood prevention. Nearly $300,000 had gone to consultants connected to Eastgate Residential. One invoice for $48,000 was labeled Environmental Compliance Strategy. Another, for $31,000, covered acquisition pressure services. "What does that even mean?" Dana asked. "It means somebody invented polite language for forcing people off their property," I said. Melissa opened an email chain. Lorraine had written to an Eastgate executive that my wetland could be neutralized through nuisance enforcement and emergency drainage authority. In another message, she promised to deliver a cleared corridor before the bank's financing deadline. The final email stopped all of us cold. "Once Reeves is financially exhausted, he will sell. Widowers usually do." I read that sentence 3 times. Not because I misunderstood it, but because I wanted to make sure the words were as ugly as they felt. Lorraine had not seen grief as something human. She had seen it as leverage. Walter rested a hand on my shoulder. "You do not have to handle this alone." I looked around the table at 3 neighbors who had once trusted Lorraine and were now risking retaliation to expose her. For years, I had protected the wetland because it belonged to Beth and me. In that moment, I understood the fight had grown larger. Lorraine had turned fear into policy and silence into permission. But she had finally pushed too hard, and the people around her were beginning to remember that a board president only has power while everyone else agrees to be afraid. The next morning, I delivered copies of the forged access letter, the financial records, and the emails to Investigator Ellis and the county prosecutor. By noon, Eastgate's construction lender had suspended the entire townhome project. By 3, the state issued a formal stop work order covering every parcel draining toward Miller Creek. At 5:17, Lorraine called me. Her voice was tight enough to snap. "What did you do?" I stood on my deck, watching a pair of wood ducks circle the damaged marsh before landing in the one pool the excavator had not reached. "I showed people the truth. You just cost this community millions." "No, Lorraine, you did that when you forged my name." Silence. Then she whispered, "You cannot prove I signed it." "I do not have to. The investigators will." She hung up, and for the first time since this began, I allowed myself to believe the balance had shifted. Then, just before midnight, my trail camera sent an alert. A dark pickup had stopped near the back of my property, and 2 figures were climbing over the fence carrying pump sprayers. I was out the back door before the second alert reached my phone, moving faster than a man my age had any business moving. Flashlight in one hand and the old aluminum walking stick Beth used on muddy trails in the other. The 2 figures were already inside the wetland, spraying something along the surviving sedges near the waterline, and when my light hit them, one froze while the other kept pumping the handle like maybe determination could make him invisible. "Set the sprayers down," I called. The taller one turns toward me. "We have authorization." "From who?" "The association." "The association is under investigation. Not our problem." Behind me, porch lights started coming on across Alder Ridge Lane. I had set the trail camera system to send alerts to Walter, Dana, and Melissa, and within 2 minutes, they were moving toward my property with phones raised. Walter arrived first in pajama pants and work boots, carrying a golf club that had not seen a golf ball since the Clinton administration. "Evening, gentlemen," he said. "You picked a poor place to garden." The men tried to leave through the side fence, but Dana had already parked her minivan across the access path, and Melissa was live streaming from the edge of the yard. One of them dropped his sprayer and ran. He made it about 30 yards before slipping in the mud and landing face first in a patch of cattails. I will admit, that sound did something restorative for my spirit. Sheriff's deputies arrived 8 minutes later, followed by Investigator Mara Ellis, who took one look at the chemical containers and called the state environmental response team. The labels had been peeled off, but the residue tested as concentrated aquatic herbicide, the kind used to kill vegetation in drainage channels. The men worked for a subcontractor tied to Sterling Land Solutions. Their phones contained messages telling them to finish the Reeves cleanup before inspectors return. The sender was saved under the initials LM, Lorraine was arrested the next afternoon at Mercer Premier Realty while giving a presentation to potential buyers. Dana later showed me the news clip. Lorraine was standing in front of a rendering of the townhome project, smiling beneath the words "A Better Future for Briar Hollow." When two investigators walked into the room, "Lorraine Mercer?" one asked. Her expression changed before he even reached for the handcuffs. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. "I am the HOA president." The investigator nodded. "That title does not come with immunity." By the end of the week, search warrants had been served at Lorraine's office, Eastgate Residential, Sterling Land Solutions, and the HOA Management Company. What began as illegal excavation widened into fraud, forgery, misuse of association funds, conspiracy, and attempted destruction of environmental evidence. The forged access letter carried my name, but the digital file had been created on Lorraine's office computer. The contractor invoices had been approved through her private email. Eastgate's internal messages showed they promised her a percentage of the development profits if she delivered the drainage corridor and pressured me to sell. The phrase they used was voluntary acquisition. There was nothing voluntary about it. Then investigators found other names. 7 homeowners over 6 years had been hit with sudden violations, inflated fines, and liens shortly before selling properties to companies connected with Eastgate. One was a retired schoolteacher. Another was a young couple caring for a disabled child. Lorraine had built a business model around finding people who looked tired, isolated, or financially vulnerable, then turning the HOA into a machine that made staying more painful than leaving. I wish I could say that discovery made me feel victorious. Mostly, it made me sick. Beth used to say the worst cruelty was not anger, but calculation. The moment somebody studies another person's pain and decides it can be useful. Lorraine had looked at my grief and seen a discount. The case moved faster after that. Eastgate's lender canceled the project. The county revoked its preliminary approvals, and Sterling Land Solutions lost its license pending disciplinary review. A judge dissolved a lien against my home in less than 10 minutes. When Lorraine's attorney argued the HOA had acted in good faith, the judge held up the forged access agreement and said, "Counsel, good faith does not usually require imitating another man's signature." Even Walter, who had promised to behave in court, snorted loud enough for the bailiff to glare at him. The criminal case ended 11 months later. Lorraine pleaded guilty to conspiracy, fraud, forgery, and environmental violations rather than face trial on every count. She received 12 years in state prison, a consecutive federal sentence of 6 years, and an order to repay the association and affected homeowners. Eastgate's vice president and 2 consultants also went to prison. The excavation contractor avoided jail by cooperating, surrendering his license, and paying for part of the restoration. Some neighbors thought he deserved worse. Others believed Lorraine had lied to him the same way she lied to everyone else. I never completely decided where I stood. People like clean endings, but real life leaves mud around the edges. Briar Hollow voted out the remaining board and hired an independent auditor. Melissa became interim treasurer. Dana led a committee to rewrite the covenants, and Walter refused every official position because, in his words, "I have reached an age where I prefer criticizing leadership without becoming leadership." The special assessments were refunded from recovered funds. The new board permanently removed landscaping authority over conservation areas and required public votes for any contract involving board members or their businesses. As for the wetland, the restoration took 2 years. We filled the illegal trench in stages, rebuilt the natural contours, replanted more than 300 native trees and shrubs, and installed a small boardwalk for school groups and neighbors. Mara helped secure grant funding, while Samuel came out every few weeks to inspect the work and offer advice nobody had requested. Beth's broken cedar bridge was replaced with one made from reclaimed white oak. I carved her initials beneath the handrail where only I would know to look. The first spring after the work was completed, a pair of wood ducks nested beside the restored channel. By May, tree frogs had returned. By June, the lower home stayed dry through the heaviest storm we had seen in 15 years. People stood along the boardwalk watching the water spread slowly across the marsh instead of rushing into their basements. And nobody called it an eyesore anymore. The final hearing took place on a gray October morning. Lorraine appeared by video from prison for the restitution ruling. She looked smaller without the tailored suits, the clipboard, and the crowd of people waiting for her approval. The judge ordered her assets sold, including her interest in the townhome deal, to compensate the homeowners she had targeted. Before the screen went dark, Lorraine looked directly into the camera and said, "You ruined everything over a patch of weeds." I leaned toward the microphone. "No, Lorraine, you ruined everything because you thought nobody else mattered." That evening, I sat on the new bridge with a cup of coffee while sunset turned the marsh copper and gold. The breeze moved through the sedges. Red-winged blackbirds called from the reeds, and somewhere near the far bank, a heron lifted into the sky. For the first time since Beth died, the place did not feel like something I was preserving from the past. It felt alive on its own, carrying her memory forward without needing my permission. Lorraine believed power meant having the authority to change other people's lives. I learned that real power sometimes means standing still, documenting everything, and refusing to be moved. But here's the question I still argue about with my neighbors. If an HOA genuinely believes one property threatens the entire community, should it ever have emergency authority to enter private land, or does that kind of power always become dangerous in the wrong hands? Tell me where you stand, and if your HOA ever crossed a line it had no right to cross, share what happened, because silence is exactly what people like Lorraine count on.